program that's all about quality of life for chronically ill teens and young adults aged 13 to 25. It's predominantly a volunteer program, and I began as a volunteer in 2009. There's a lot of hospital rules around volunteering, and if anybody here has ever volunteered for a chance, you probably know. In the beginning, you're supposed to shadow somebody, and they tell you, you want to get close with someone, but you don't want to go over a personal boundary. Definitely don't give your personal contact information. Try and stay away from really heavy topics like spirituality that could be controversial. When I had my first day of volunteering, all of that was blown away, and I broke every single rule. My director, our founder at the time, sent me to see a patient who was actually on an adult floor. And the volunteer from the previous shift brought me up. She said, this girl's having a really hard time. Basically, she dropped me off in the room. It wasn't her fault. She had to leave. And I sat in front of this girl in a dark room, not knowing what to say. And I learned so much from her that day. I learned that this girl grew up in a community where seeing a doctor was against their belief system. I learned that she was 16 and had already been married and had a child and was actively trying to fight for her life against pancreatitis. And I learned that everything I thought was a problem at the age of 19, which is where I stood at that time, really was not. And would you believe it, last night at 10:30 at night I get a text, and it's this girl. And I started telling her a little bit about what was going on in my life. She was telling me what she was up to. I told her about this conference and storytelling and what I wanted to talk about in Streetlight. And she sent me these words. She said, I feel like life advice from people who feel it is trying to slip away is the most genuine of all. And then she said, it is life altering if you survive a chronic illness. And though you wouldn't wish the pain on anyone else, sometimes you feel as though they're missing out on two things, they being healthy. Peace with the end and knowledge on what will actually matter when you're facing it. And I realize now that if I didn't allow my boundaries to come down, if I didn't connect with her, I wouldn't have this friend almost 7 years later. And that really is the whole message of Streetlight. So these are some things that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk a lot about perception, because quality of life is not so much what we do, but what we think about what we're doing. And I take the stance that by allowing ourselves to genuinely connect with other human beings, our perception of our quality of life increases, it becomes fuller, and we extend our legacy. So here's an example. Above my fridge, I have a small fleet of special glasses. And if I'm going up there to get something and I nick one of them, I'll hear a clink sound, but it'll go away immediately. And if I happen to hit one that's touching another glass, that's connected to another one, that sound continues to go on longer past the time at which I hit that one glass, it reverberates. And that visual is a little bit like what I feel connection with other human beings is when we allow ourselves to touch other people and have this network. They are the sounding boards of our lives. They amplify the song that we make, and that sound can continue on long past the time that we're around to play it. So here are some fast facts on Streetlight. This is one of our Streetlight friends here and one of our Streetlight technology managers. This whole program is based on human connection as the backbone. And it's a model of palliative care using peer support as an intervention to meet the psychosocial needs of teens and young adults. So when you hear about palliative care, oftentimes you think of the term hospice. So a little bit of a different vision there. Hospice is a service that's there for people who are within their last 6 months of life. Whereas palliative care begins at diagnosis and extends through cure or end of life. And it's a supportive care. And when people hear about these kinds of programs, they usually think about an older generation receiving them. But the patients that we see in our populations, they have cancer, sickle cell, cystic fibrosis, and diseases necessitating organ transplant. because of the long-term ongoing challenges of the people that we see in this population, we make sure to especially select UF college students that can commit a minimum 2 years to this program. And we train them in a special way too. So when we have our new volunteers that come in, every time that we meet as a group, we are sitting down for an hour before they even see patients, and we're going over a focus, which is basically a story. It can be something that I write, it may be a poem from someone living with sickle cell that's giving her experience. It may even be a testimonial from a volunteer who's giving their story, partnering with someone and what they've learned, and then we learn from that perspective. And then we talk about the individuals that we're supporting and what we can do to personally support them. So we're dealing with teenagers and young adults, we're using pop culture, we're using movies, we're using song lyrics as a way to make purpose and even go through a spiritual meaning-making process of what is happening in their lives. And I always want to make sure that it's genuine. I never want this to be something where someone clocks in for their volunteer and does their time, okay, that's great for med school, and then we leave. It's about relationship, it's about friendship, and it's about trust. And that's a very powerful kind of support for teens and young adults. There was a BBC article that came out years ago, and they refer to chronically ill teens as the forgotten tribe. And when you think about it, you hear us see the St. Jude's commercial. We see those usually around the holidays. You think about the faces that you see in those commercials, they're usually younger school-age children. And that's what we think of with pediatrics oftentimes. However, pediatrics includes patients that are in their early and mid-20s. And this is kind of a collage of some different images of our pediatric unit at UF Health. And we have an excellent place to treat people. But the aesthetics don't always match the entire patient population. I can think of a girl, she was receiving a bone marrow transplant. She told me, and she was in her mid-20s, she told me she walked out of her room one time, there were 2 4-year-old girls, they stared at her with her IV pole, and they laughed and said, I can't believe there's anybody that old on this unit. There's this whole culture that peds is for younger kids, and for the ones that are older, they feel like, this doesn't necessarily represent me and who I am. So you get already a little bit of a tension in your healing process when you don't feel like this place was made for you. That's why Streetlight is aimed at focusing on the age-specific psychosocial challenges of this group. So why teens? Where we're at right now with our teenage population, it looks a lot different than it did 20 years ago. So specifically with cystic fibrosis, we have people that are living in early adulthood when they weren't living past the age of 5 before. I think we're better at extending life with certain kinds of cancers. But with that, we also have a really challenging kind of secondary effect that comes with these treatments. So with cures, we also have amputations. We have chemicals that affect cognition. We have emotional trauma. I know of several people who have talked about being in the hospital long-term and they're diagnosed with PTSD afterwards. And even secondary cancers that can come out from primary treatment years later. Specifically with teens, the social coping looks differently than it does with other groups. When you were 8 years old, maybe you wanted to be held by your mother in bed when you were sick or something bad was going on. But when you're 18, maybe you want your boyfriend or girlfriend to be holding you, or you want to be surrounded by your friends. And specifically for teens in this chronically ill population, they don't always get that normal socialization. Many of these people weren't able to go to mainstream high school and make that social community because of their illness and the limitations they've had to go through. With a new diagnosis, a lot of times right in the beginning, we see a big burst on social media. They'll say, everyone's blowing up my Facebook. They're telling me they're going to pray for me. They're going to be here for me. What do you need? I will be here. Just tell me what you need. And then the longer that they're away from their home community, the longer they're in the hospital, not going to high school every day, not around their peers, that support just kind of dwindles and they have to watch their whole world go by through social media, the world that they're missing out on. We also see that not only are the teens isolated from their peer group, but sometimes they intentionally isolate themselves. When steroids are blowing you up and you look like you're 50 pounds more than you were before, or chemo's making you lose your hair, maybe you don't want to be seen by people at that point, so you stay in your hospital room and you don't ever leave. I also unfortunately see a lot of breakups, and that's a really, really tough thing for people in this age group, anybody to go through, especially when support is needed most. You don't want to have to go through additional loss on top of that. So peer support affects coping, the ability to deal with stressors, and even the meaning-making journey of spiritual development. Because peer support is so important but so fragile for this age group, we want to make sure that it is built into the adolescent healing process. Because sometimes someone can have the best medicine coursing through their veins, but if they don't have a will to live, if they don't feel validated by the people around them, then they don't have purpose. So going back to the concept of perception, it's the perceived availability of social support that is the best indicator of well-being. The stories we make for ourselves, they're subjective and we create them. Thus, whatever someone perceives as good, as worthy, whatever makes that person feel alive, that's the narrative that we want to help them live. So here is an example of one young woman that we supported in Streetlight. This is her narrative. She said, "Thank you for dancing salsa with me and letting me use my legs after so many weeks of being bedridden. Thank you for letting me get it all out without judgment. Thank you for putting up with my attitude. Thank you for being such great friends who do not look at me as someone with a disease, but rather as someone worth befriending." And in this young woman's narrative, the protagonist was a dancer. In those moments, surrounded by her Streetlight friends, she transcended just being an ill person, just being someone diseased that had to receive care. Instead, she lived the story of her choosing. And you don't have to be a wise old sage to reach that kind of transcendence. We can do that at any stage of life. Which brings me to this quote that I love by Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor and an author. He says, "We cannot judge a biography by its length, by the number of pages in it. We must judge it by the richness of the contents. Sometimes the unfinished are among the most beautiful symphonies." And we're all making our own symphonies. Recently, I was visiting a patient that we saw a few years ago who was treated for osteosarcoma. He was a big athlete and he had to get an above-the-knee amputation. So at that time, we're all thinking, how is he going to reform his identity right now when he cannot play basketball, which is his heartbeat? So I see him a couple weeks ago. He comes back. It's been a few years, and he tells me he's in an IT degree program right now, and he's also making his own beats. So think about like the background instrumentals in hip hop songs. He's merged his computer knowledge and with his art, and so he's using a computer program to make these. And I asked him, what is your process for making music? I'm not a musical person, so this is all really interesting to me. And he says he'll hear a tune in his head, just become inspired, and then he'll press keys on the computer until he gets the exact note that he hears in his head. And then he'll do it again with the next note, and he builds his music note by note like that, literally playing it by ear without ever being taught how to read music. But there'll be sometimes, he says, when he can't figure out just what note is supposed to come next, how to pull off that vision inside of his head. And so he'll call up his friend who's a producer and also plays the piano, and that friend will help him work it through and fill in the gaps. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's how life is. We get touched by this inspiration of what we think could happen, what we see for ourselves, but we don't always have the tools to pull it off by ourselves, so we lean on the people next to us who maybe have a little more experience, a little more capability in an area to help us. And I think we are all creating these symphonies, and in Streetlight, we find that collaborative works are oftentimes the most poignant. So sometimes we come across a very gifted composer who needs our help to make their dream a reality. So enter Roy Gossett. Roy's mom gave me permission to share his story with you all today, and she said that she would be honored if his story could be used to impact anybody else. So you are all bearing witness to that. I'll tell you a little bit about him. Roy grew up in a mobile home nestled into the rural countryside of Cairo, Georgia. Now, it's actually spelled like Cairo, Egypt, but everybody there pronounces it as Cairo, so that's what I'm going to do. It's Cairo. He lived there with his extended family, his 4 lovable but mischievous dogs, and I had the pleasure of meeting them all this summer, both the family and actually 3 of the dogs, because one was in hiding at the time. So Roy was diagnosed as a baby with cystic fibrosis. Has anyone here heard of this disease, or you're familiar with it? Yes. If anybody has not, I'll tell you just a little bit. It's a genetically inherited disease. And basically, it affects every system of the body, most apparently the lungs. So there is no cure for cystic fibrosis. We can do lung transplants if somebody is eligible. Roy was not. And even with lung transplants, on average, the lifespan after receiving a lung transplant is somewhere around 5 years. With cystic fibrosis, there's daily management that goes into this. There are percussive breathing treatments that they have to endure. So 4 times a day, they're wearing a vest that's hooked up to a machine that basically vibrates and is supposed to break up the mucus in their lungs so that they can cough it out before it drowns them. They also have to use a nebulizer treatment. For someone with cystic fibrosis, it's pretty hard to be active. They will tell you that breathing for them is like breathing through a straw. And I remember when I heard that the first time, I took an extra long inhale, just knowing that I could. CF also affects how they metabolize their food. So they have to eat several thousand extra calories a day just to maintain weight and take enzymes to help them digest their food. We actually made a relationship with BJ's Restaurant and Brew House here in town. They support CF, and we worked out a deal where every time a CF patient comes into the hospital, they will give that patient a free meal of their choosing, because nutrition is so important for them. They are coming into the hospital so much, and we want to make sure that they're actually eating something that they want to eat. This is a disease that takes over every aspect of your life. And Roy, although he had a very gregarious personality, it was tough for him to make friends at school. I think when we don't know someone's story, we tend to make one up and think that that's what their story is. And I think it was probably hard for the kids his age to see the hero that was underneath the kid who was coughing all the time, the kid who had to miss out on most of the school year due to hospitalizations. But nevertheless, Roy decided to fill his story with the characters of his choosing. And so those of us at the hospital were invited, or should I say mandatorily conscripted, to join the cast. And the invitation often began like this. You might be walking down the pediatric unit to your intended destination, only to be called out from a patient room with an aggressive, "Hey you, get back here." And you think, this couldn't possibly be for me, so you take 3 audible steps, keeping on going in your direction, and then you hear another, "Hey you, I said get back here." And then you look around, and there's this slim teenager standing in the doorway with a cunning grin and an outstretched finger beckoning you to come back. And I actually don't remember my first initial meeting of Roy. It was probably about 5 years ago now, but I've seen that scene so many times that I think it might as well happen to me. I think the greater human population, I'm putting myself in this too, we oftentimes let fear, self-consciousness, insecurity get in the way of striking up a conversation with a stranger, maybe giving someone a compliment, maybe asking a personal question when we're already in a conversation with someone we know, or allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. We stay behind our invisible barriers, all the while knowing that human connection is essential for our survival. And I've never met anybody who lived the truth of connecting with other human beings like Roy did, and who aggressively sought it out and tightly held on to it with every fiber of his being like him. If you knew Roy, it was not uncommon to walk by his room and see this cacophony of so many different individuals in the room. There would be volunteers mixed with respiratory therapy, mixed with nursing, mixed with maybe a physician, and in some way, they would all be orchestrated by Roy, wearing these yellow paper infection control gowns that were required to enter the room. You know, someone might be holding an Xbox controller playing WWE wrestling Xbox, and then somebody else might be drawing a silly picture with a dry erase marker on the treatment board. Someone else might be DJing music off a cell phone as dictated by Roy, and then maybe someone's in there for a legitimate medical reason. And in Roy's story, he was the composer, the director, and the author, and I, along with my fabulous Streetlight team, just did everything we possibly could to try and help him live what he sought to create. So, in assisting Roy to become the leading man of his own life, we helped him transform into a variety of characters. Roy became a ninja warrior, a rock star, a superhero, and a wrestling champion. And I'll get back to the significance of this one shortly. It seemed as though every mission was a new mission, a new role to master, all made possible with the loving presence of Roy's Streetlight volunteers and so many other people at the hospital too. It would start oftentimes with a prophecy, and Roy would say something like, "Emily, you are going to help me be a ninja for Halloween, and you are going to throw me a party with all the Streetlight members." And like a true prophecy, reality followed. Roy's 2-week hospitalizations increased to around once a month, and at that time, Roy's support team, as well as Roy himself, realized that he was entering into a new season of his life, the sunset of his life. So we gathered around as a Streetlight team, and we decided we need to show Roy his legacy while he's still here to see it. Because too often you go to a memorial or a funeral service and you think, wow, I wish that person was physically right here to see what everyone has to say about them. So Drew, who's our assistant director right there with the yellow gloves, he decided, let's make a documentary about Roy's life, about the epic person that this is. And we're going to fashion it after an episode of VH1's Behind the Music. So this is a 30-minute documentary that is filled with interviews from different fictional portrayals of all the characters that were in Roy's life. So basically all of our volunteers came together and they assumed different roles, like Roy's backup singers to his rap tour, talent agents, professional wrestlers in Roy's illegal wrestling chain, and even engineers who shared about helping Roy to prepare for his final adventure, which was a mission to space. So Drew cut footage of our team members acting, and he mixed it with different clips of Roy at different Streetlight events over time. Times where he was singing, dancing, and just performing as the personas that he always wanted to be. Upon completion of the video, some of us gathered in Roy's hospital room for a small and intimate viewing party with him. And although at that time his energy was nowhere near what it had been in some of the clips from the video, I will never forget watching his face transform when he got to see how we all saw him as a human being. Through this video, or as we call it, a legacy project, Roy finally had the chance to see himself as the legend that he was. And a few months later, after this, I had the privilege to get to sit down with Roy and talk with him about his advance directives, his decisions around the end of his life. We talked about who he wanted at his bedside, where he wanted to die, even what would come after death. We talked about if you play a song in this life, would it keep playing on the other side? And we picked out what we thought that song might be. When asked, is there any place you'd want to go, anything you'd want to do, any last caper that you'd want to pull off, anything we can help you do, he paused for a moment and he looked up at me and he said, I want to watch the upcoming WrestleMania pay-per-view with the Streetlight team. Mm-hmm. And I want to do it at the hospital so we can make sure that most of them can come. And I mean, in the moment, I'm trying to be so present with him, but I'm thinking, could do anything. You could go to SeaWorld. We could take it to South Beach. Like, what, you know, you want to come to the hospital and watch WrestleMania with Streetlight? Okay. All right, we'll work on it, Roy. We'll see what we can do. Roy ended up going home, and we weren't sure if he was going to be at home in Georgia or if he would happen to be at Shands on April 3rd, 2016 from 5 to 11 p.m., which is when WrestleMania was scheduled. But it turned out that just a few days before WrestleMania occurred, he was at the hospital, and we were ready. So we assembled our team, we made a banner, and we acquired special physician approval for him to leave his room out of the infection control isolation. Typically, a patient would have to wear a yellow gown and a mask and gloves. However, it was so hard for Roy to breathe, and he really just wanted to look normal that day. So we all just decided we'll wear all the infection control, and he can be who he wants to be on that day. So we ordered him a steak dinner. We got temporary tattoos, face paint, and some of our volunteers even took it upon themselves to give some special souvenirs, like this bedazzled wrestling championship belt and this luchador mask. And we didn't know that this would be the last party. We didn't know that a few months later his family would actually bury him with that mask. But we did know that we had a hero in our presence, and we knew that he deserved an evening befitting of his epic character. 8 hours after the WrestleMania program began, we wheeled Roy back to his room, and he was painted, tattooed, and smiling. And I asked Roy, we took the banner down, I asked him, where in your hospital room would you like me to hang the banner up so you can look at that and think about it? And at first he pointed to a space on the wall, and then he said, no, actually, would you hang it in the Streetlight office so that everybody will look up at it and they'll remember me? Roy finished composing the symphony of his life on Memorial Day weekend of this year. And when his mother called me up that he did die, it was not a surprise to me. He actually called me every day the 2 weeks from that admission leading up to his death. And the one day he didn't call me, I knew that something was a little bit off. His mom told me that it was a very peaceful death, and he was surrounded by family as when he died in his sleep, which is really what he had wanted. And my first thought then was, after hanging up the phone with his mom, is I need to call up my entire Streetlight team and let them know. So contacting not just 70 people, but people who have come through our program over years, that when they come back in town to Gainesville, they check and see if he's in the hospital to see him. We had an incredible community of support to notify. About 15 of us drove up to Georgia for the funeral. And then the next question everybody was asking me is, when are we going to do the memory share? So the memory share is something we do in Streetlight when we have a patient die, where we all gather together and we share stories about that person. And it looks different depending on the patient we supported. So for instance, one guy was really into Nerf guns. We did a Nerf gun party for him. So each of us at that memory share shot a Nerf gun up at the wall, shared a story, passed it around, and that was the memory share for him. For Roy, we had about 50 people gathered in the WrestleMania party room, which seemed fitting. People who drove up from South Florida, all different places, just to get to share with their Streetlight team members. And we healed, and we grieved, and we shared stories about him. And we watched the VH1 Legacy video, and we wrote down messages to him on his banner. Something else we do with the help of arts and medicine is we send memory boxes to the families. And there are these beautiful boxes that this angel of a woman named Savette makes. And what we do is we go around with all of our Streetlight team, all of the healthcare staff that would have known that patient, and we write stories to the family. Some people write as if they're writing to the patient, some write to the family. And it's a way to show that family how this person has impacted our lives. and to make some more meaning of what their child gave to the world around them. I sent that memory box recently so that it would arrive for Roy's birthday in October, and his mom was very grateful to receive that. We continue to sing the song of Roy Gossett, and today is just another way that his story is being made known. He has become immortal. And I know, to an outsider watching spandex-clad men and women wrestle on a hospital projector screen may not seem like the best finale to one's life. But Roy perceived that as the ideal final act, made significant because of the loving friends who surrounded him that night. And going back to those glasses on the top of my fridge, I feel like we're all a little bit like them. We're intricately formed, we're fragile, but when we connect, we have the power of making such a beautiful sound. And just think of the kind of music that's possible when we allow ourselves to connect, to give and to receive each other's love. So I will close with one of my favorite poems by the mystic Rumi. And what I love about this poem is that I think it shows the catching nature of sharing our lives, sharing our stories with each other. The patient I mentioned to you that texted me last night at 10:30, she said, I think it would be great if we could grab life advice from all different patients that have come through Streetlight and then put them in a book and share their stories. And so I think this poem kind of grabs that, what she was trying to convey, and what's possible when we share. It's called, Isn't That Something? I like it when the music happens like this. Something in her eyes grabs hold of a tambourine in me. Then I turn and lift a violin in someone else. And they turn, and this turning continues. It has reached you now. Isn't that something? So that's all I have for you today. But are there any questions or comments? Yeah.
Do you have copies of that poem?
I can certainly make them. It's right on. I found it in a book translated by Daniel Ladinsky, who translates a lot of different mystics over time. But really, I just grabbed that from Googling it for this presentation. So it's out there. But I'd be happy to, after we can exchange info, I can email it to you. Any other thoughts? Thank you all so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I do have a question.
Sure.
As your volunteers are learning their stories to create this narrative, do you have, is it a training program, or is there a template of questions to ask, or how do you gather the story systematically versus just interpersonal relationships?
Yeah, I will say that it is pretty organic. We, in our hour-long briefing sessions each week, and that all comes after about 8 hours of classroom training, but our biggest goal is really to try and keep those experiences really flexible and malleable. So we always tell someone when they go in a room, you don't want to lead with a script. It's really more responding to kind of where that person is at. And we find that, one day, somebody in a hospital room may be really open to speaking, and then the next day they may be so nauseous that they just don't even want to go there. So there isn't really a tract that would do.
Interpersonal relationship.
It is, yeah. And I think that because we do those meetings every time that they see, it's kind of a debriefing where they can come back to myself and my assistant director and talk through communication styles. What do we do now, with this? How can we go from here? So yeah, it's really interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. Adding on to that question, do you find themes are different depending on the age? Obviously, the age frame of 13 to 25 is pretty wide.
Yeah.
Do you find a difference over the time, or is it more of a difference by personality type?
That's a good question. Both.
Okay.
Yeah, developmentally where a 13-year-old is at is so much different than where a 25-year-old is at. And even just the presence of family, I think, is a variable to consider too when somebody is sharing about their life experience and their stories. And also gender differences too. So for instance, we find like our younger adolescent population, if I was to sit down from a 14-year-old kid that was playing the video games and say, hey, how's it going today? Tell me, how are you feeling? He would not respond in the same way he would as if he was playing video games with Alex and then they had a conversation going through a medium like that. So it really is different for every person, but you do see, even in those different age group populations, the older ones have a little bit more of a toolkit on how to express themselves and just articulate their thoughts, and the younger ones maybe need a medium or something like that to go through to do so. Yeah. And also, some differences too that are worth noting, just that are unique to a hospital setting, is a shared room versus a private room also affects how open and vulnerable someone wants to be. I mentioned before too the presence of family. We have a little trick in Streetlight where we'll say to the parent, do you need to go get some coffee or make some phone calls right now? And it's a benefit to the family sometimes because they don't get those opportunities, but it's also really great to allow that teenager or young adult to have a place to just say whatever they want to say without judgment on someone who knows them.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. So obviously I get the whole nature of this. Is there a particular way to collect some of these, or is it just based on your team's memory?
That's a good question. So part of our documentation as a program is that our volunteers, after every visit, will note aspects of that visit. And so we do have a record of who is seeing which patients and what that person's interests are, any valuable information that can be used for building a relationship. And that's part of our psychosocial discussion when we have those hour-long briefing meetings with our team. Yes.
So then, yes, go ahead.
No, you have the floor.
I just, so what happens is you build around the narrative that you're hearing. In some of these projects, like the legacy projects and things like that, are, do you do that for everyone?
And it depends on the patient and what they want. So, we see varying levels of how much involvement someone may want from Streetlight. For instance, if someone doesn't have a lot of family support or social support, they may need more companionship from our team than someone who doesn't. It also comes into play, if someone's receiving more like an outpatient chemo, they're just not going to be in the hospital as much. And so some of their biggest supports may be people on the outside of the hospital. So we make ourselves as available as someone would like. One of our statements that we always say to patients when we're introing the program is, we are here as much or as little as you want. You are in control, and always feel free to say what you do or do not want. And we find that in the hospital there's so many things outside of your control. Even something that can be perceived as something really good like peer companionship, someone just may not be in a state or a place where they really want or are ready to receive that. So they're kind of in the driver's seat on what they want, but we always put it out there though.
And one last really quick
Sure.
question.
Yeah.
How many ongoing cases do you have?
So that's a great question. We, in our database, we have about 2,000 patients, but actively, on a given day on our census, we may have 30 to 40. However, we have ongoing follow-up with patients that are not in the hospital. So for instance, if someone's birthday comes up, then we're sending them a birthday card, even if they don't come into the hospital. And any week we may have like 3 to 6 birthday cards that we're sending out. We get everybody on the team to sign them. So there's a degree of it that isn't just who's inpatient right now. Of patients that we've seen in around the last 2 years that we would actively be supporting in and out of the hospital, there's about 1,000. And I actually conveniently know that because we're trying to do a research study on the program right now, so we can get all of our numbers together. Yeah.
I'm curious about the genesis of Streetlight and its spin out of arts and medicine, and how are you funded?
Oh, that's a great question. So, how it began, our founder, Rebecca Brown, quickly, she had worked in ministry in Gainesville for 25 years. She went to Berkeley to get her Master's of Divinity, and she was studying adolescent spiritual formation. And she had some connections here at Shands. Dr. Grampole was a big person. And so together, along with some other individuals, they formed this program. Originally, because her background was in music, she thought, well, this could be kind of a hospital patient-made choral production where they go around and sing as a unit. And then she thought, well, gee, if you have cystic fibrosis, it's pretty hard for you to breathe, let alone sing. So it kind of morphed into peer companionship from there. This was back in 2006. And then now how we're funded predominantly donations and grants.
Excellent.
Thank you. Yes.
What are some of the challenges you all face, and do you have any new directions that you're headed in, or what are some of the goals that you have?
I think the challenges that I see is that there is always much more need than what I feel we can effectively give, just with the limitations of our staff, even resources. We see a growing social need in the, I'd say 20 to late 20s group, because they're no longer in high school, they no longer have access to a lot of the 18 and under supported programs. That even comes up with insurance and just different things that are offered if you're under 18. And so we do see patients on the adult floors. We will transition with them when they go up there. And something that we are trying as much as possible to provide is community support as well. So for instance, September was Sickle Cell Awareness Month. We were doing karaoke nights with our patients living with sickle cell at Applebee's. They do it on Friday nights, just so you know. We did a public mural on the 34th Street wall. We support the North Florida Chapter Sickle Cell Association and do walk with them, flyering on campus to get awareness out there. But it's trying to extend the genuine friendships made at the hospital outside into their lives, because so many people, they come to the hospital, they receive support, they receive friendship, but that's just not there outside of the hospital. So it's something that we're actively, talking about and trying to figure out how can we extend ourselves, but keep realistically in the resources of where we're at as a program right now. We also have patients that come from other facilities, other institutions saying, I have a Streetlight here too, can you guys come to Orlando? And so, trying to think of a way where we can give the support so that it's available everywhere.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.